part of the work that we do, I mean, when you're working on your own other stuff and your mind is part-time in a freedom space, and then when you go, it's like having that perspective. It's like when you go back to the park in a paradise, and then when you got to go back to the salt mine during the week. If the world was kind of a general mine, you'd be like, well, so I work during the day at the salt mine. But you leave, if you can leave work, and it's like, oh my gosh, there's so much other better things I want to be doing, like badly, then going to the salt mine is extra cringe.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I'm about done with the salt mines myself. We'll see what happens with these couple little projects I got cooking, but I'm hopeful. We'll see. Yeah. I feel your pain, though. Last week was not great at my place either, man. It was just like, enough's enough, man. Like, why am I putting up with this nonsense, But, it is what it is. It's a living. Hopefully do some good in between, all that, et cetera, yada, yada, yada. But, we had some kid come in. He's just, like, completely off the chain, man. Just, going nuts in there and banging on walls and doing all this crazy stuff and threatening to kill everybody. And it's just like, come on, man. So, it just, when you, like I was just talking to my sister, I'm up here visiting her in Seattle, right? And I was just like, I don't know why I went into this career not fully expecting that you're just going to be dealing with dipshits all day long, right? I mean,
I had no idea. I know.
My brother-in-law works for Meta, right? And it was just like, oh, he probably doesn't deal with this. Like, he probably doesn't go to work and have one of his clients say, hey, I might throw a cup of piss on you if I get mad. It's just like, or whatever. I mean, I'm sure there's not people just routinely threatening to kill him or to, ruin his day or make his life hell, or I mean, they're just not like all day long overt threats or subvert threats, and yet there's the world I walk into every day, and it's just like, good. And then there's all the government bureaucracy and everything else around it, and it's just like, geez, so just why, so I don't know.
Yeah, from the public sector, I mean, I remember there were hard things about it, like, okay, competitive, you're working hard, you're hustling, you're being compared. Things that don't work can be quickly put away or cut. Things that work, you go with, and it's change, and that can be a hustle.
Yeah.
Went into the public sector, but so in the private sector though, it's like, shit's getting so weird or bad or whatever, like it goes away or you go away, and you move on, and if you have a sense of personal agency in the whole matter, you are simply you're pursuing what you can do better, where you can do it better, or whatever you want. You can change. In the public sector, what I had to get used to for a long time was
in private sector.
So that was in the private sector. Now when I went to the public sector, it was definitely, so I went there for mindset reasons of really wanting to make a more deep, fundamental impact on, sort of like the foundation of what holds society up. Or I wanted to connect more directly with people, do education,
right,
be a tangible change in the world, all the good reasons.
Yeah.
And little did I know, it's sort of like kid wants to change the world, be a little superhero and be a cop or something. And I was like, I don't know that you want to be a cop in late stage empire.
Oh, God, no. Either you're part of the problem or you're just feeding the problem at that point for most of these folks, whether they realize it or not.
And what you're dealing with, it's like, okay, go stand out in the ocean and hold that tide back. Hold your arms out, get wetter. Put your out wide, hold that tide back, and you're just like, oh my gosh. And being wet gets old, so like that. And yes, there's performance, but it's sort of like someone's got to do this job. Like someone's just got to do the job, however it happens, however good they are at it. Somebody's doing it. The money comes from somewhere. It's getting paid for. It all pays the same, and it's you.
Yeah.
So in my world, just lately, superficially, we're short-staffed. And then you can work smarter. and work harder. And you run out of any smarter ways to do ditch digging. Like you're digging ditches as smart as you can dig ditches. Sorry,
Right.
that's it. You're digging ditches and you're doing it as smart as you can.
Yeah.
You're finding efficiencies. But what you need are more people to help spread the work so that ditch diggers don't start, beating themselves on the head over their own shovel. And so
Yeah.
I was reaching that limit where it's just like, it's a sheer capacity issue. There's too many problems, too many people, and not enough of sort of what's expected from government to do the repairs on it.
Right.
That's where I'm at. That's how it feels.
Well, it's a competency crisis, man. I mean, like that guy Financial Physics talks about it all the time. I was just talking to my sister, and like right now, if you get paid $25 an hour, people go, "Oh, that's a pretty good salary." If you take that back to 1991 dollars, that's the equivalent of $8 an hour in
Minimum.
1991. So people have an idea of like $26 an hour as a living. I go, no, it's not, man. That's like making minimum wage in 1991. Like, it's terrible, Like, I think in 91 the minimum wage was like $7.25 an hour, if I'm not mistaken, somewhere around there, $5.25 an hour, I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
So it's just like barely above minimum wage. But so $26 an hour today is like having a $10 an hour job, in the 90s, and like you could kind of get by on $10 an hour in the 90s, but just like people can kind of get by on $25 an hour today. But the thing is if you look at like, what $25 an hour back in the 90s would have got you, that's kind of like $50 an hour today. So if you want competent people to do these jobs, you got to be paying like $50-$60 an hour, right?
Yeah.
And they just can't do it because, they've just broken everything. And when I say they, I'm talking like Federal Reserve and, and all the nonsense that they did with all that. Like, you can't quadruple the money supply in 3 years and then just expect everything to work, right?
Yeah.
So, they've been bailing out Wall Street and they've been bailing out all these ding-dong corporations. And, like Robert Kennedy just put out a big thing. He was saying, like,
Well, you think about a family that used to be able to have a stay-at-home parent and what that meant for a family to have a parent that could stay at home. And
yeah, but I mean, that hasn't been true for 50 years, like
that
was
a long time of all this.
Yeah, I mean, it's, there was a brief period between like 1945 and 1970 where you might be able to pull that off. But starting 71, and just like that little meme, what happened in 1971, that's, all that fell apart. It just broke right there. The second they went off the, pseudo gold standard they had, they just, there was no restraint on the creation of debt. And so the whole world shifted towards just, scoop up as much as you can at any cost and let everyone else go fuck themselves. And that's, where we're at today, right? So there's, Bitcoin is the only thing that's going to get us through this ultimately. And if it doesn't, then we get to start over. And I don't think people are prepared for what starting over looks like. And it's going to be a goddamn bloody mess. So I keep hoping, I just finished up the book last weekend. And, I got to finish writing the introduction. I went through and edited stuff. I changed the part order around. It's now power, money, greed, and Bitcoin rather than money, power, greed, and Bitcoin. So kind of a little shift there. But, I'm sitting on close to 65,000 words right now. And once the introduction and everything's done, it'll probably be 70,000 words when it's all done.
Wow.
I still got to build out like the bibliographies and then get it in paperback form. But as soon as it's available on Amazon, I'm going to drop it on Nostr. I'm going to drop it on my own little personal website and then just, see if anyone wants to read what I got to say. But, the core premise of it is exactly what I'm talking about right now is like if Bitcoin doesn't serve that purpose, then, with all credit to the ANCAP people and libertarians and stuff, and they go, if we could only just go back to, and I was like, there is no time in history that you can go back to where it was good, right? There's 15 years after the war, after World War II, and they were doing all kinds of fiscal stimulus and all sorts of nonsense then too. So, a lot of that productivity were structural things like Europe was flat, right? Like all the factories were gone. U.S. had all the gold. U.S. had all the manufacturing capacity. And so for 15 years, things were pretty good in the U.S. And then they just screwed it all up. And they, because they wanted to go adventuring, having their little adventures in Vietnam and Korea and shit. And, if you go back to that time, you could say, well, they were fighting communism, and today we're fighting communism again. And you go, okay, well, I mean, maybe it was a worthwhile endeavor. I mean, they saw the writing on the wall just like everyone in today is. And so people that get pissy about the military-industrial complex, you go, well, that's where it came from. It's the same battle that you guys are trying to fight right now.
Yeah.
So,
it's hard to imagine without that quiet Cold War and global domination and whatever other hijinks were secretly going on with the pile of wealth that the intelligence and power structures had at their disposal. In an alternate universe, it could have been that, okay, if we'd have done nothing about Russia and that kind of communism had just spread unfettered, what that would have looked like or what problems we would have had. So, okay, that collapsed through sheer bleeding of that monster and trying to compete. But we're still looking for monsters. We're still finding the next war to fight, and so that we can maintain the mechanism, which is spending that money, printing that money. And so Bitcoin fixes this. I hate thinking about politics, but I was in a conversation with my mom, yesterday about some things, and it always goes back to like politics, or for her it's always Trump, or it's always, what Elon said or something. And it's like, well, trying to avoid the politics, but at a deep fundamental level, I can't ignore that it feels like this sort of social civil war, where on one hand you have people that are recognizing like, no, freedom and privacy are important. And on the other hand, you have effectively quiet communism.
Yeah. So
there's those powers colliding. And I feel like this coming election is going to be this really weird, like as weird as ever, where all the narrative and polling we have leading up to it is that somehow this is just 50-50. We can't tell. There's no clear leader. You might think but you can never know. So whatever direction the wind blows on election day, half the country will say that was fake, and the other country will say, get over it, we got to charge hard. And I don't know, is this civil war? It just sounds so dramatic. But
yeah, well, I mean, the thing is everybody in America is so fat and domesticated, and just, like, I don't think there's enough people in the country to muster a actual fight. I mean, everyone's pretty adept at, squabbling online, and there's, a handful of people that don't mind going around burning cities down just for the sake of it. But in terms of like people getting out and actually having a scrap, and who's going to pick sides on what and all that kind of stuff, like I think that's still pretty far fetched right now.
Yeah,
just
not physical.
So many people that are so unhealthy. Like Kennedy's been talking about the health crisis in America, and I think he's spot on. But I mean, if you consider like 2/3 of Americans are diabetic or pre-diabetic, like how many of those people are going to be out fighting a war? And then you got this younger generation, like they don't understand any of this stuff. They're not paying attention to it. They're not tuned into it, and it all is just sort of like doesn't make sense. It just looks like a bunch of old people doing chaos shit, and I don't think they're invested in like, hey, let's go fucking shoot each other, right? So we'll see what happens. I mean, with the Democrat Party now, they're so disjointed, and I mean, they're like the totalitarian, police state party now. But the Republicans aren't far behind, right? So yeah. It's just.
I feel like basically there'll be more and more laws for reasons past that criminalizes most everybody, and effectively you'll feel like, well, yeah, you have to be a slave or be a criminal. Those are the two options.
Yeah.
I was in the airport yesterday at Portland Airport, and I just reminded me because I haven't wanted to think about it, but it's like, okay, coming May 5th or May 7th, 2025, Real ID is required to fly anywhere.
Yeah.
You can't just have a driver's license. It's got to be a real ID.
Right.
And I remember over the years and years ago, it's like Montana was fighting this, and various states were like, not going to comply. Sorry, feds, we're states.
Right.
Well, it's over.
Yeah.
You got to have real ID. So, and on one side, you can, okay, so get a real ID. Who cares? It's like, okay. So if you want to function in this society and you want to fly, the ID you have to have has to be federal.
Well, that's not really federal. I mean, they just bolstered the requirements to get the ID, so it's sort of like it. In a way, it kind of makes sense. Like all the same people that rail against voting ID, were sort of all for real ID, and it's like, well, it's the same process, right? Like you just need to validate who you are in a more objective manner, and that it's a federal requirement, but it's state run, right? So I don't know. I mean, stuff like that, like. People will wrap themselves around an axle just because that's the popular thing to get wrapped around the axle about in that moment, but nobody really cares. Like, once they get past their little online rage and just go, this is, and, they just fucking roll over and just take it in the ass anyway. So anymore I hear people griping about stuff, CBDCs or real IDs or anything. I just go, shut up, man. You're not going to do anything about it. You're just going to sit there and fucking be a lump on a couch. So just fucking suck it up. Just get to the part where you're sucking it up and taking it in the ass anyway. And like what I wrote in the book is like people, oh my God, the CBDC, they're going to do this, they're going to do that, they're going to enforce all that. I'm like, they can already do that right now. Aside from the fact there's massive legal barriers to being able to install a social credit system or a carbon score system or any of that kind of shit. Like you can't just do that overnight. They're not going to, And if you talk to the bankers that are talking about a CBDC, like they have literally never even considered like, hey, we might be able to control the population and force all these draconian ideas down their throats because we have a CBDC. They're just not talking about that. They're not thinking about it. And while it can be something fun for people to get all, worried about, like, the reality is everybody in the United States of America gave up their financial privacy in 2001. They gave up all their financial freedom in 2001, and no one said a peep about it. No one's ever bitched about it. No one's ever done anything about it. From the time the Bank Secrecy Act was passed in 1971 to today, they keep passing more and more and more of these laws. Nobody's writing their congressman saying, hey, don't pass that law. Hey, I disagree with this. Hey, they don't even look at it. They don't understand it. They don't know anything about it. They just see some new thing at the bank. They go, oh, I have to do this now. Okay, this is, I don't like this. And then they just do it anyway. So, real ID, it's just like, just go fucking sign up. Like,
But another thing, so I'm just going to go sign up, and that's just another little feather in my featherless cap. And so I'll have opinions, and more it's like, none of your opinions matter. You are a criminal, guilty until proven innocent. And you must constantly jump the next hoop to prove yourself innocent. So you get used to that. There's no hope. There's no changey, hopey thing going on for any of us. Vote harder. No, don't matter. So there's no hope. Well, wait, but I guess what we can do is Bitcoin.
That is the hope, right? I mean, that's the thing. Like, nobody's going to change the structure the way it's going and the path that it's on. What Bitcoin is going to do is just change that one little fundamental rule at the bottom of the game. And then, as it permeates, like as that cure goes through the system, then all these little systems start healing, and then all this stuff becomes less relevant. Like, no one's going to give a shit about this stuff in 10 years because it won't matter, right? And that's why Bitcoin is such a big deal. It's just, which is also why we need to be real careful about how we promote it and defend it, and and are conscientious about how it gets deployed and all that kind of stuff. Because if that fails somehow, if it becomes a tool of state capture, if it becomes a sovereign controlled thing, if it becomes a corporate controlled thing, if the network fails for minor collusion or any number of things, then you got then there really is no hope, and then it's sort of over. But provided the network stays decentralized and secure, then the fix is already in. Like, it's already working its way through the system. We just have to make sure the system doesn't collapse before it gets a chance to get healed, right? And that's sort of
the only way to stop Bitcoin would be to collapse the whole system, like, deeply.
Well, no. I mean, Bitcoin can get stopped all kinds of ways, and that's the part we need to be careful of. The easiest way to screw up that network is to continue to allow mining resources to be concentrated, and then they get state captured, and then they can start censoring transactions. And the second you can censor transactions, the game's over, right? So
that is a concern. Yeah, at a global level, I guess I naively see a trend where small size nodes are rolling out all over globally in small ways at sources of power, and there's an awareness of the centralized mining captures that have happened, ant mining and all that. So I guess I feel optimistic that the mining part is diversifying, but then again, it can't just relax knowing that it's going to happen naturally.
Well, I think the natural order of things is that it continues to concentrate, right? I don't think it naturally disperses further. I don't think it decentralizes further. I think it tends to concentrate in fewer and fewer hands, just by the nature of the technology required, the capital investment to get the mining operations going, and things like that. That's, like I asked Adam back in Prague. I said, "Well, what do you think about miner concentration and censorship of inbound transactions?" He goes, "Yeah, that's a big problem." And that was it. Like,
Yeah,
he didn't have an answer for it. And so the thing is, like, you can have nodes decentralized all around the world. It still doesn't solve the censorship problem. And if you have a censorship problem, it's like once there's majority hash power, then the network's done, So that's one of the reasons I say, if you're a Bitcoiner right now, you should be running a miner like a BitAxe or a FutureBit or just anything, just get some hash power that's not tied to a farm and just start throwing your hash power at the thing. If you had every single Bitcoin holder that had more than 0.1 Bitcoin in a wallet mining right now, then there would be zero risk to the network, you see. Like, that would probably sufficiently decentralize the mining operations that there would never be majority hash power. But right now, I mean, I think there's just a handful of miners in the United States alone that could probably comprise or get pretty close to majority hash power. And they're all subject to U.S. subpoenas and U.S. warrants and all that kind of stuff. So, we're in tricky territory right now. But like I said, as long as Bitcoiners are conscientious about their movement and take it seriously and don't just sit back and go, well, it's inevitable. Well, it's not. So be thoughtful about what you're doing.
We're in this global adoption epoch where, if nation state adoption starts to actually happen, it may be that, it's the big players competing, but the next big decentralized stasis we could reach is where big players, nation states with the big resources, are in competition to maintain their share of Bitcoin skin in the game. And you got China, Russia, the U.S., and any other country that wants to throw some, petahash at it. They're all going to be fighting for a large, huge amount of proof of work. I guess that's my hope, is that you might have large players and not just, well, there's China and then there's the rest of us. It could be that it's China and the U.S. and then a amalgamation of a lot of other smaller countries, but that can throw a lot at it.
Yeah.
Maybe that's...
Well, that would require that all of those people understand the risks that are inherent in, majority hash power scenarios. And, and I think we've got a ways to go, because most of these places won't even buy Bitcoin, let alone fire up a mining operation to defensively defend the network, And that also precludes like any pressure from the major powers like the United States going, hey, don't you do that, or who knows what's going to happen, right? So, I mean, right now, like I said, the one way is for that sort of altruistic mining, every holder doing altruistic mining and mining to their own node and not mining to a farm is one way to decentralize that, where you don't have to rely on sovereigns to do the right thing, because that rarely happens, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it could be, the scenario you lay out could happen. I don't know, but But the broad point being is, like, provided that network stays decentralized and secure, provided they don't end up with a censorship mechanism for inbound transactions where they have to be OFAC compliant or whatever compliant inbound transactions and don't get filtered somehow, then the Bitcoin cure can work. It's like, and that, I think, is inevitable. As long as the network stays decentralized and secure, it just inevitably works its way through the system, and you have nothing to worry about on that level because it's the only thing that makes any sort of rational sense moving forward. Anybody that looks at it for long enough comes to the same conclusion, like, oh, either get on this or I'm fucked.
Yeah.
So that's the part where I go, yeah, but we still need to make sure that the network stays decentralized and secure to get there, right?
Yeah, one thought I had about this being that there's a lot of attention on, like, the 51% attack, 51%, and it doesn't have to be 51%, but anyway, say there's a lot of large central players that have censorship type, regulatory type interests engaged fundamentally, and they're in Bitcoin, so they're going to apply their cleanup on blocks when they mine it. But there is a good 5 or 10% of I think of ocean mining or other small miners whose block tolerance is libertarian, and as long as there's at least some of that, so Bitcoin is being protected and validated and running, like there's no shutting it down, cannot be shut down. And if you're doing normie conformist Bitcoin stuff, no problem. And if you're not, or you're trying to, well, I've got a transaction I want to be a certain secretive way or certain whatever, I've got to wait long enough for that 5 or 10% block discovery.
But they won't be the longest chain, so that wouldn't matter. Like, if there's majority hash power and they censor inbound transactions, no one's going to know those transactions are being censored. Like, you'll never know.
Literally not acknowledge that block and just get 3 blocks.
It's not that they don't acknowledge the block; they just don't accept the transaction into the block. You see, so
they could. That's true.
Miners can do that right now. Miners can filter transactions right now, and there's not a thing in the world a node operator can do about filtering transactions, right? And all those people who are pushing Bitcoin knots and saying, "Hey, we need to filter out the spam and all that kind of stuff." Like, they go, well, yeah, I mean, that's a noble pursuit.
Yeah, right.
And you're also censoring transactions on a fundamental level. You're censoring what's coming into the Bitcoin blockchain. So yeah, people could run Bitcoin knots, but if you have majority hash power that's not running it, and they run a censorship mechanism, then you won't know. Nobody would know. You'll be on the longest chain, and you won't know that, like, hey, 5,000 transactions got bounced because they came from Iran, or 5,000 transactions got bounced because they were non-OFAC compliant, or and you would never know. You would never be the wiser. You'd just be sort of happily piddling along on a censored chain.
Yeah.
And then, if it ever became discovered, then you're talking like a hard fork, then, right? And who goes where? And if all the money is wrapped up in the longest chain, and they don't care about censored transactions because that's where all their money is, and guess where the chain goes, and guess what happens to the rest of the Bitcoiners? They become Bitcoin Cash 2.0, and then the longest chain turns into Statecoin, and
Bitcoin could
over.
So it's not just that the majority of these centralized miners would. It's not just that, oh, we're not going to acknowledge certain transactions. They'd have to say, like, we're not even going to acknowledge that entire block, which may have.
That's not true. That's not true. They can absolutely process a block and filter transactions into that block. They can say these are not going to be included in that block. Period. Yeah.
So, but when a block gets discovered by Bitcoin knots, they would have to ignore that and keep trying to fork off the last one if they're going to.
But if they have majority hash power, then that becomes an irrelevant point. Whether or not Bitcoin knots discovers a block first or not, whichever one ends up being the longest chain is going to be. That's how Bitcoin works. It's based on the longest chain is the true chain, right?
Yeah, but
the majority hash power processes the block at the same time that knots is processing some other block, and the longest chain becomes whichever one has a majority hash power that confirms it, right?
Yeah, I'm just saying that the majority of the miners would have to deliberately not validate that block discovered by knots. Knots discovers a block, and they'd have to say, yeah, we're going to keep mining for the longer chain. Like you can't accept that block and continue mining and get the longer chain. You're forking. So
Not
knots.
necessarily. And even if knots accepted some transactions and then you had the majority hash power, like if you have majority hash power censoring half your transactions, then where are you? Right? So it's, I mean, maybe a block gets through with a censored transaction, or maybe 10 blocks gets through, but the point being is if you have majority hash power, they're censoring the majority of transactions, then you're borked. It doesn't matter, like once that censorship mechanism comes into play, it's game over for the chain. Like it's all busted up at that point.
Yeah, they'd have to both censor transactions and censor whole blocks categorically because it came from, say, a not blessed source, say, or like
not necessarily. They can let those, even then they could let those blocks pass. It wouldn't matter because if they're blocking, like I said, if they're censoring 90% of transactions, if they're censoring 20% of transactions, that means it's a censored chain. Period.
Yeah. So
it doesn't matter.
Yeah. So then we've got the censored chain. So then you want to get some transaction through that the main players are not going to approve. Right. You have to wait longer for Bitcoin knots to find your transaction. But it could get through.
Well, the thing is, if your transaction just gets bounce, and then you go through once, you're still being censored, right? And if that happens at scale, like I said, if the majority, like it's the old saying, like if someone lies to you 10% of the time, how often do you trust them? 0% of the time, right? So if 10% of the transactions are being filtered that are non-OFAC compliant or whatever, and that's just at 10%, but if you have majority hash power, they can filter the majority of transactions coming through by definition. Yeah. So yeah, maybe someone can sneak one through, but
you'd have to wait.
Well, potentially, but that I mean, even still, like that, the chain is broken at that point. Is my point. It doesn't matter if your one transaction gets through; the chain is busted because no one's going to know which one has filtered transactions or not, right? So
well, that's where I feel like unless the big players are willing to commit to forking, they have to acknowledge that some of these not approved transactions are going to get through still. They can't just shut them all out. If they're allowing for a Bitcoin knots discovered block to be added to their chain.
Well, I mean, that's up to the node operators, right? But the thing being is it doesn't matter if knots is producing 20% valid blocks and the majority hash power is producing 80% bad blocks. That chain is corrupted at that point. 80% of the transactions have been censored. So you can't trust the chain anymore because the chain is censored.
Yeah, at an ethical level, I totally agree. I feel like
it's not ethical. I mean, it's a practical matter. I mean, that's the end of the chain. Bitcoin dies right there. Like that whole experiment goes away.
It gets harder and worse for people that are trying to, be free, or you're doing transactions that aren't approved. But anyway,
well, that's the thing is like it's not on an individual level what I'm talking about. Like what I'm saying is, if majority hash power is censoring transactions, the chain is not decentralized and secure anymore. It is insecure. It is a censored chain, and the whole thing is broken, right? So it doesn't matter if a handful go through and then the majority don't, because the transactions are censored at that point. You don't know which ones are valid. You don't know which ones got bounced. You don't know how long of a queue there is of invalid transactions. You can't even trust the chain anymore because you don't know. I mean, like, I don't know how to get this across any other way, but like, like I said, it's the same thing as the liar thing. If someone's lying to you 20% of the time, you trust them 0% of the time. If 20% of the transactions are censored, then the chain is 100% invalid because legitimate transactions didn't process.
And my thought is, you have a truth, you know of a fact, a truth, that you're waiting for a liar to say. So a liar is lying and lying and lying, and you're just waiting for them to say that one truth that you know, and then they finally say it, and you're like, okay, I'm done now. You said that one truth, that's all I was waiting for. I know you're a liar, but you said that one fact, I'm done now. That's all I needed to hear. So
I don't understand how that would save the chain, though, dude. Like, that doesn't make any sense.
The chain is compromised, but you could still get certain transactions through without
Potentially.
Yeah. So, but it's not.
I mean, with majority hash power and collusion, then I don't even think that can happen because they can just bounce all of that stuff. So
maybe, yeah.
Well, I mean that's the broad point of this whole thing is like it's a possibility, it's a possible scenario, and if people just sit on it and just go, well, I'm just not going to worry about that, then then I think the likelihood of that outcome happening increases, right? But
I feel like good key players growing in the mining space. Clean Spark acquired Grid, and there's at least politically there's talk about making mining an American strategic thing. It's possible that good quality miners, like I was listening. Well, so the very last podcast of What Bitcoin Did, they aired it Friday or Saturday. They're done, and they're changing their format, but What Bitcoin Did is done. And on the last episode, they had Matt Odell, Jack Mullers, and Harry Sudak on. And Harry created American Bitcoin mining company, a lot of mining stuff generally, but Grid. Grid got bought by Clean Spark. And Harry, I tell you, is totally legit. Like all the values, all the Bitcoin goodness, it's all there. So I feel like, okay, there are good, big, growing American miners touting themselves like, we are America's miner. Yeah. And they have support from the government. And they're getting distributed energy-wise in America. And they go globally. But I feel like there is some good momentum here for good, decentralized, value-based Bitcoin.
It's not decentralized, though. But just by what you said, they're centralized into CleanSpark right now. So
they are.
That's a huge centralization of mining power.
They are, yeah. And at least
if it's U.S. based, then they're subject to U.S. authority, U.S. subpoena power, U.S. OFAC compliance, U.S. every single possible regulation. So whether or not the next administration comes in and says, yay, good for Bitcoin mining, the administration right after that can go, hey, this is a threat to national security. We're not doing this anymore. You guys need to start censoring this. And if BlackRock and all those people see some financial incentive in censoring certain transactions so their number can go up rather than caring about what happens to the plebs, then that happens. You see what I'm saying? So it doesn't matter what sort of ideological bent they have. If they have some CIA guy knocking on their door saying, we will end you and your entire family unless you start doing this, they go, okay, I'll start doing that. Like their values and principles are going to go right out the fucking window, because if you're looking at being thrown in a hole for the rest of your life, or having your family killed, or having your whole life turned upside down, or having the thing nationalized, or God knows what state power and state authority is a wide-reaching, powerful force, and very, very few human beings can withstand it. So I don't know, but
at least what I'm hearing them say is that the values are good, and in their generation of current leadership, it's all good, centralized as it is. But at least it's it is in America, and the Bitcoin values are there. So
yeah, but that's the problem. That's what I'm saying is, like, regardless of what the values say, if they're centralized in America, that's a problem. I mean, because they're reliant upon the U.S. sovereign to maintain the freedom of that network, to maintain the sovereignty of that network is now subject to U.S. sovereign control. That's a problem.
Yeah.
It needs to be decentralized further than that.
So let's say you've got a government that really doesn't understand Bitcoin, wants to maintain control, but is like, wow, I don't know. I can only, so if certain politicians are elected, yeah, we're done, we're fucked. It's just kind of like whatever. If other politicians are elected and they're like, okay, we need to figure this out. How do we do this? How does government do this? We make a panel, a committee. We invite the experts and we put them in charge. And we do that with the people who are good at it, who are these good people. So then the policy and the direction could be steered by at least the good people. And then it gives legs to more of the quality values behind even something that's federal. So if there's any hope to that.
Well, that's FedCoin then, right? I mean, that then by definition becomes FedCoin. Like the whole purpose of Bitcoin is being stateless, permissionless money, not FedCoin money that's managed by a group of people in the United States that come up with what we think is the best idea for the network, right?
Well,
Because that is a corrupting force. That is an absolutely corruptible force, 1,000%. It's always been corrupted for the last 5,000 years of written, recorded human history. People that get in charge of the money get corrupted 100% of the time. There's no mistaking it. So the idea that these guys will just come in and somehow be benevolent, dear leaders that are going to, guide Bitcoin the way the U.S. thinks it should be guided, I go, that's a catastrophically bad idea. The thing that Bitcoin needs is decentralized mining, not concentrated mining in the United States of America. That's tragic. What the world needs is Bitcoin plebs to be mining. It needs mining operations to be springing up all around the world. It needs as much decentralization as the nodes, bare minimum. That's the true aspect of Bitcoin security. It's not allowing it to be centralized. I mean, that's a full stop.
Think of Jason Lowery's book, Soft War, and how, a couple of years ago, whatever, when he was like, America needs to get in strategically on this. Mm-hmm. And yeah, we do. So it's sort of like it's going to happen anyway. So is it bad? I mean, I just don't know how if Bitcoin's what Bitcoin is, the nation states are trying to get in on it. So you think of soft war. What do you think of software these days? Like, it's just, they are the enemy.
Well, the state is the enemy of the people, always. I mean, it's there. Like, if you want to trust paper promises, then you trust the state, right? Jason Lowery's point is this thing is the defensive bulwark of the world. That may be true. It may be the next line in cyber defense. Nation states may adopt this, around the world, and the broad point being is it doesn't matter if mining power is centralized. That's the whole point. If we allow mining to become centralized, then we are subject to majority hash power and whatever rules they come up with. So whether it's centralized in China, whether it's centralized in the United States, if Lowery's thesis holds true and other countries are mining, strategically, then yeah, that helps decentralize the network. But we're not there yet, right? So right now we are confronted with the issue of, can mining become so centralized right now that they can censor the network? And that's the thing we need to be fighting against right now. Satoshi's vision, Satoshi's original paper was distributed mining, not distributed, nodes are great, having distributed nodes are great, but the way the thing is set up is the security is reliant upon miners, not necessarily the nodes. So if you want permissionless, stateless money, you need to decentralize mining, and that is something that I don't think enough people are focused on right now, which is why I'm such a big proponent of, like, if you're a Bitcoin holder, you should be running a BitAxe. You should be at least altruistic mining. Like, you shouldn't be out there for the monetary reward. You should be out there for the revolution. And if all 1 million of those holders were all running, 7 terahash each, then guess what? Mining is decentralized in a way that can't be shut down. It can't be censored. It doesn't matter who tries to spin up a new mine in the United States of America. It's just not going to get there because they have to overcome, 7 million terahash of decentralized mining. And then you have all the other global miners that aren't necessarily under OFAC control or U.S. control. And so it becomes significantly harder to acquire majority hash power. And if all those benevolent, altruistic Bitcoin holders get on board with that, and then they keep increasing their hash power every year or 2 years or something like that, so they end up with 14, 21, then mining is truly decentralized, and then the network is truly decentralized, and that's the security apparatus that we need to be relying on. So if nation states come on board after that, then maybe some of these people can start shutting down their altruistic mines. If you have widely distributed mining all around the world, then you have less of a problem. But if it's all under sovereign control all around the world, then you have a different problem there. And for countries to collude, if there is an incentive to collude and censor transactions, some group of people will do it, right? So what we need to do is make sure that the cost of doing business is prohibitive. The only way you can do that is have massively decentralized mining, but that requires people hop on board and donate a little to the cause by paying their $1.20 a month in an extra electricity bill. So
What
I
might
don't know, man.
drive the decentralization is simply the distributed nature of energy production. Uh, various energy, trapped energy globally, all over in Africa or wherever, where it's like, okay, we made a dam here, or we got some gas here, and we're moving it this way and that way, but there is excess. There's always this little bit of excess, or at peak hours, whatever.
Right.
And if Bitcoin becomes the gap filler for all energy utility stuff, that decentralizes it pretty well.
That would help, certainly. Yeah. I mean, again, like what, just imagine if all the nodes were controlled by countries, right? Like if the sovereign controlled all the nodes, would you trust that network?
No.
Right. So if all 162 nations on planet Earth controlled all the mining power, would you trust that network?
No.
Right.
But
So what we need is,
I think of our local utility district where it's like, yeah, it's a company, and they're the ones that keep the wires connected and deal with power outages and bill us. At least it's like there's elected elected commissioners. I don't know.
yeah, subject to sovereign control. I mean that's
Yeah.
for it to be stateless, it needs to be stateless, right? Is my point. For it to be permissionless, it has to be permissionless.
Mm-hmm.
It can't be subject to sovereign capture. The second this network is subject to sovereign capture is the second that the network gets compromised, and then we're in big trouble.
And
there is no second best, right?
Yeah. How does it feel to be darn near done with a book? This is the first actual book you've written, right?
No, it's my third, but the others were about acting. They were kind of ding-dong books anyway.
I wrote a book on acting.
Yeah, but I mean, I've written probably the equivalent of about 10 books by now, like in terms of all my research papers and everything I've written, and screenplays and you name it. I mean, I've been writing for 40 years, so I've got a huge volume of stuff. But it feels good to have this book ready and done, mostly. I mean, like I said, there's probably a couple thousand more words. I think by next weekend I'll have all the core writing stuff done. And that's assuming I don't go back and add a little bit here and there to part 1 through 4 and just kind of flesh some stuff out. But, I was trying to come up with like the grand ending to part 4 and just the big meaningful, like, this is going to sum everything up. And I don't know if I quite hit that, but, I wanted to give myself a little break this weekend just to kind of let that sit and percolate and kind of get more into diffuse thinking rather than focused thinking, and see if I can come back to it with a fresh set of eyes next weekend. And maybe I can flesh out part 4 a little bit further. A lot of part 4 is devoted to like CBDCs and privacy concerns and things like that. I devoted a big chunk on altcoins and the difference between altcoins, like shitcoins and Bitcoin. And I wanted to make real clear for the lay readers and Bitcoin readers alike that there's a big difference here, right? And I think I did a pretty good job of laying that case out. I still don't know if I've made a strong enough case for like Bitcoin as a treasury reserve asset and why I think that's important. I hope I did. That analogy I came up with a few weeks ago, like when we were talking about like the antibodies and cancer and all that stuff. I fleshed all that out, and it's in written form now, so I think it's coherent. I'd be interested to hear what you think about it. I mean, if you ever have an opportunity, I hate making people read stuff that, just.
I want to read it, and I've read your earlier drafts of the chapter of part 4, but I've not read the most recent version. So I do want. It's up though, right? It's online.
Yeah, it's on Medium right now, and like I said, for those who aren't familiar, if you're not familiar, like the writing process is a constant shifting between very focused attention, like that sort of flow state kind of thing, and then diffuse attention, like taking a walk and trying to let stuff percolate so you can come back and get back into, and you need to. The trick in making this work is you need to vacillate between the two and give yourself the latitude to do that. And I've been in very focused mode for a long time, so I think diffuse mode right now is going to be a welcome sort of break for me, and just I'm hopeful that next weekend when I come back and sit down, I can actually hear better, see better, and hopefully have some better ways to finish this
That
project and make it as good as I possibly can.
yeah.
Pardon?
You have like an aha,
Yeah.
an epiphany of a point to kind of put it all together.
Yeah, it would be great to button it up and make it poignant. I mean, it's like ending anything is nearly impossible. Like people used to bitch about Game of Thrones. The ending was terrible. I'm like, you try and end the story, dickhead. Like it's hard, man. To come up with something that resonates and is poignant and works and people get and are happy with. It's like it's really really hard to do.
Yeah.
So into
it, they're like, okay, we're gonna quit at the peak, and they still screwed it up.
Right, yeah. I mean, that's, like, look at Seinfeld. I don't know if you were a Seinfeld fan, but watch their last episode, and it's like, this is garbage, man. What you guys do?
Yeah, I know. But at the same time, you just have to know that, hey, things come to an end, and endings suck, so.
Right, yeah. And I'm trying to avoid that as much as possible. I mean, some people get it right, There was, I don't know, did you ever watch the show Justified? Well, there's a guy named Timothy Oliphant that was the lead of the show, and my ex-girlfriend was just like, hey, we should watch Justified. I think you'll like it. It's about this U.S. Marshal, and he goes and gets in gunfights all the time. I'm like, oh, okay, I'll check it out. Turns out Mr. Tim Oliphant is like this really beautiful man that she was just like voodoo over, and was like, oh, God, come on, man. You wanted me to sit here and watch Model Boy run around and, tip his cowboy hat and be like, But, through it all, I watched the show. I mean, it's pretty cartoonish, right? Like, this guy, he's supposed to be a U.S. Marshal, but he, like, literally gets in a gunfight every episode. It's like, dude, you would have been banned from that fucking agency, like, 100 years ago.
Walker, Texas. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, he was quite literally, it was just like a more serious Walker, Texas Ranger kind of thing, right?
We got another lawsuit. Hey, Commissioner, lawsuit.
Yeah, hey, you're on admin duty right now, and you're going to be riding that desk for the next 2 years, So, I mean, it was a nonsense show, but the way they wrapped it up, I mean, it was basically a Western, right? It was like sort of in the Western vein, but that show, they tidied that one up at the end pretty well, and I was like, that's a nice little bow they put on that series, so people can do it, and it was like this really simple and kind of poignant way to wrap up the series, which I thought worked great, but, yeah, it's just like I don't feel like I've gotten that with my book. Like I said, I would love to hear your opinion on it. Just tell me what you think of the ending, or if it resonates, or if it's just kind of like, so that's the end.
Yeah. It's so hard and big and complicated. No one really knows exactly what this means. Good luck.
Right.
I mean, you would love to know and say, this is what it's going to be. And so future tellers, soothsayers, they're lying. Sorry, they don't know. Nobody knows. And
nobody knows, yeah.
So the books that sell often come up with something quite believable and tantalizing, and you say, this is what it's going to be. And then that's like, did you hear? Did you hear? And it's bullshit. But
yeah. I'm still excited. I feel like I have something worth hearing for whatever that's worth in terms of the stuff I wrote. I hope people can at least appreciate the effort that I put into it and we'll at least give it a fair shake. But
I'm gonna read it and I'm gonna think about it. I'm gonna have to let it percolate myself and see if there's some epiphany of my own that contributes, because we've talked a lot, and I do hit my limits where it's like, every time I think I might know what's going on, I realize it breaks all models, and I'm managing to understand what the models are, let alone all models. I don't know what that means.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I mean, I think everybody runs into that problem. People really enjoy certitude. I like certitude. I like, kind of having my little pet theories about what things are going to do, and et cetera, et cetera. I'm just trying to keep myself humble in the face of extraordinary change. Like I wrote in the book that Bitcoin is the most profound invention ever by humanity, ever in the history of mankind. And so for someone to sit down and go, oh, well, power law says it's going to be this price, I just go, you're a fucking asshole, dude. Like, it's like if you take the invention of harnessing electricity, gasoline, heavier than air flight, space travel, all of it, put it all together and go, Bitcoin makes all that stuff look like child's play. Then you go, okay, so what's that going to do to the world? Whew, like, God only knows. Yeah. I genuinely believe that the narrative that Bitcoin is going to create, like, I think as this sort of cure works its way through the fiat cancer system, like, I think things like the miner decentralization will start making more sense, especially when the cure starts working. People are going to go, oh, yeah. Not only is it valuable for us to carry and hold and use this, it's super valuable to make sure that no one else can fuck with it, because that fixes all of us, right? Yeah. And my thing is, in the short term, I want as many people as I can possibly inspire to run a miner is sort of my short-term goal right now. Is like, look, when I'm talking to you about this stuff, when I'm talking to anybody, all 12 people are going to watch this or whatever, I go, look, man, it is such a critically important thing for people to adopt. And just, you know, I know it's a little bit of a financial burden, you know, because one of those BitX miners costs, what, like $500-$600, something like that. To spin up the electricity is probably going to raise your electric bill probably $20-$30 a month, whatever your rates are. And you're doing an enormous service to the network by running that, right? It's an enormous lift. And there's all these like little USB miners and all that kind of shit. Just throw some up there. Some of them run like 10 watts. Just fucking throw a 10-watt miner on your desk and just let it roll, you know? Yeah.
It's better than the lottery, and every time, rarely, one of them hits, it's like, yeah. Hey, yeah. That's important. This is good.
I mean, I kind of look at it like, if you just think about the number of people that are probably Bitcoin holders that still play the lotto, I go, hey, man, rather than dumping those lotto dollars, put those dollars to good use, you know, and you can still play the lottery. You're playing the lottery every 10 minutes. You're just like, woohoo, here we go again, woohoo, here we go again. Just let it roll. Let it kind of keep doing its thing, because you're simultaneously doing two things. You get to satisfy your gambling habit for the same cost of buying a lotto ticket every week, and you get to help secure the network. You get to help be part of the actual revolution, you know. Like, being a holder is great, awesome. Love people that buy Bitcoin, hang on to it, and go, I know what this is about. I know I'm part of the revolution right now. But you're basically like a water boy on the front lines, right? Yeah. You're not even a water boy. You're a guy at the back of you know, way behind the lines. You're carrying water to injured soldiers, you know. Yeah. Node runners are the next field up. They're the ones right behind the lines and kind of going, okay, we're here. We're ready to go jump in. But if you're a miner, you're right on that front line. You're part of the revolution then 100%. If you run a mine, you run a node, and you're holding, then you're the guy. You're one of the revolutionaries. You're one of the people that are helping make this thing go where it belongs, and you're helping to permeate that cure much faster. So that's my impassioned plea to the world. Please, altruistically mine. Get out there, do your part. It's so easy now.
Yeah, and it should be a cure to all the world's gambling problems. I think the dopamine hits you when you're actually physically scratching the wax off the paper, or you're hitting the button and the lights are going and you smell the smoke. If only gamblers could short circuit all of that experience, knowing that they've just got a BitX in their closet.
Yeah.
But it's way better odds.
Way better. You know, like my miner running in the background right now is, it's running at home, obviously. That thing, I have like every 10 minutes I have between a 1 in 500,000 and a 1 in 750,000 chance of hitting a block. And, you know, I'm 100% solo mining. I'm solo mining to my own node. I'm not part of any pool. I'm not part of the solo pool, none of it. I'm just like, the whole purpose for me running that miner is to be between 5 and 7 terahash of extra power that's not corrupted by, censorship mechanisms, right?
Admirable.
Well, thank you. Depending on how well my other little business venture goes, I'm probably going to stack that out, because FutureBit makes amazing little miners, and you can chain them, And so I'd really like to get to a point where I'm running like 700 terahash and just sitting there just going, and then get my odds down to like 1 in 10,000 or 1 or whatever, and just go, every 10 minutes, and it costs me $200 a month on electricity. I don't give a shit. Like, let it run.
If you hit one decade,
if you hit one per decade, then fucking hey, dude, like, you paid for everything.
Yeah.
It's I mean, who knows? I could have hit a block by now.
Sure.
I could be a lottery winner right this second. So,
Yeah. I
yeah.
had funny. I was well. It was because of a conversation with my mom yesterday about, well, what if sort of innocent questions about Bitcoin, but like, why can't it be regulated? Why can't it be shut down, like from governments? And part of the recently quiet take from Elizabeth Warren, or don't say the word crypto lately. It's kind of this like, let's get through the election right now.
Yeah.
And I was like, yeah, they're not going there because it's a loser topic. If you're anti-privacy and pro-statist, shut your mouth.
Yeah.
So don't say crypto. So can crypto be regulated, whatever? I was thinking through it all, comparing it to, like, not perfectly, but as a protocol, email. Email is like a communication protocol using, you got your SMTP and your IMAP and your POP3, and that's built upon TCP and IP protocols. And they just run. You have the internet, and these protocols run. So try shutting that down. You can't shut it down unless what? You're going to take down the internet or take down the grid. So like try to shut down email. But what did are that, central parties say, oh, no, we do email for you, and you've got your Gmail or your Yahoo or whatever, and yeah, I mean, sure, they can read your email. So you got that. But as a protocol, you can't shut down email.
Right.
And so my mom was asking questions about that in terms of, like, I get it, but when it comes to Bitcoin, I mean, criminals use it, and all that. It's that argument. Criminals use money. So I was like, yeah, criminals use money. And the number one money criminals like to use is the dollar.
Yeah.
But
Cash money through the banks.
Let's say
Yeah, the number one network they use is the international banking system. So it's it's the dumbest fucking argument in the world.
Sourced directly from banks to governments waging war.
Right.
Anyway, let's just say that criminals use money. Okay, criminals use money. When it comes to freedom of speech and email, it's sort of like we're more understanding or culturally like take for granted the fact that, okay, well, we had the pencil and the ink and the pen and paper and the printing press. And so freedom of speech feels like a fundamental expression that people should be able to do, because to shut it down is quite a thing. Mm-hmm. Transactions, money, a kind of freedom of expression, a communication of value, an interaction, exchange of value. Mm-hmm. How is that different? We're living kind of Stockholm syndrome, where it's like, no. Money is this, and you use this because to do differently is either inherently suspect, anti-government, anti-bank, whatever. And you use our money. That's what you do.
Right.
I said, what if all communication, we're talking about an alternate parallel universe history. All communication was done on Federal Reserve notes. You had to write a note, and communication were approved through a note that occurred through a particular note that was issued by the government. And there were plenty of them, and if you needed more, you made more of them. But all communication happened on notes, federal notes, Federal Reserve notes. And so then a new technology comes along, and you're like writing your notes, you're paying for stamps, you wait time to get that done, and it's all approved, and if they want to, for your safety, they could read them, because they're postcards.
Right.
And if you're secretive about it, yeah, you could get a note to somebody and not have it read, but, nobody really cares. Anyway, along comes email, SMTP, IMAP, POP3. Email comes along. Imagine if that was new and everyone's brain was like, no, communication occurs through the federal notes. That's how you communicate, is notes, capital N notes.
Right.
Here's email. Imagine the propaganda against email, which
Right.
I'm translating to my mom. What's wrong with email, right? As she's concerned about Bitcoin. Imagine if email came along and the government is going through all the same arguments. You know who wrote email are like these anti-government cryptographer punks. They
Right.
say whatever they want. Can you believe that? They would just say anything they want. In fact, people could use email to say bad things.
Right.
People could use email to coordinate crimes or say criminal things or horrible things. People would write horrible things on email, which people do. And and yet to this day, it's sort of like, well, email's email.
Right.
But we're attacking Bitcoin as if, criminals can use Bitcoin. You could use Bitcoin for all this criminal stuff. In fact, I think Bitcoin's only really used for this criminal stuff.
Right.
Well, you don't think that about email.
Right. They don't think that about cars. They don't think that about anything, right? Like, I mean, the whole idea, the problem we have at a core fundamental level is criminality, right? Like, just tell me what a crime is, right? Define crime. And I challenge anybody to do it because you go, well, a crime is what? Oh, I'll give you, here, try it. Define crime.
I was joking about this with you last week, but so fundamentally I feel like it's somewhat undefined other than you could say, okay, there's God's law and then man's law, which was what? Let's call it the Constitution. And then from there, we kind of handle it socially. Lately, I feel like it's very much emotionally driven. So if it doesn't feel right, it must be wrong. Again, further undefined.
Well, the problem you run into is like right now, probably, I don't know what number, somewhere between a third and 3/4, maybe 100% of our Congress and our major political leaders around the world are compromised because they were having sex with 15-year-olds on Epstein Island. And so they're now being blackmailed and they're passing all sorts of stupid shit because they're being blackmailed and they can't get away from it. And what they were doing was they were having sex with 15 and 16-year-old girls, right?
I missed something here. Tell me who these people are again.
Probably most of Congress, most of the world leaders. I mean, everyone that's on Epstein's client list is almost certainly compromised by blackmail right now, right?
Oh, did they release something about it?
No.
Oh,
I'm just saying that list exists, and they're hiding it for a reason because very powerful people are on that list.
Yeah.
And they're all compromised.
Yeah.
So if you have all these people are compromised because they committed a crime that right now is, we'll just get them fried. They cannot escape that. If everyone found out Bill Clinton was banging a 15-year-old, he's fucking done, dude. And end of story, right? So here's a couple of issues with that. Prior to probably 1970, for the last 4,950 years of recorded history prior to that, some guy marrying a 15-year-old was not a big deal. No one gave a shit, right? So since that time, they've now criminalized it, and now they've adopted prison rules around like what you do to child molesters, et cetera, et cetera. I would say there's an enormous difference between molesting a fucking child and, some adult man banging a 15-year-old. Because like I said, historically speaking, if you go back for the last 4,950 years prior to that, that was a very normal behavior, including in the United States. Jerry Lee Lewis married his 13-year-old cousin, so he was committing incest and child molestation at that time. And everyone just kind of went, oh, Jerry Lee, and that was it, right? Now our most powerful leaders in the world are compromised for doing the exact same thing Jerry Lee Lewis did. And I go, that's a huge threat. And it's defined as a crime right now. And I go, well, so what made it a crime all of a sudden? For 4,950 years, not a crime. Last 50 years, now it's such a huge crime that you can compromise an entire elite group of people that are fundamentally in charge of the world. Well, that's crime, right? It's just this nebulous thing that people decided, we don't like this right now. We didn't mind it last year. Now we don't like it, so now it's a crime. And you go, well, what's a crime against God? Well, if you're religious, then you can say all kinds of stuff. I think there are some pretty well naturally baked in things into the human species, like killing another human being is fundamentally against the propagation of the species. So that's why it's really hard for people to overcome that that reluctance to commit homicide. But, so you could say, well, is that a universal law? Well, I mean, if you believe in God, then you can say that's God's law. If you don't believe in God, you can say, well, that's a very natural evolution of humankind. If we killed each other all the time, we wouldn't exist as a species. So it's better that we don't kill each other. So you could say, yeah, that's probably a good idea.
Yeah.
I think universally, if you went down to the Hazda tribe right now, because they don't have any criminal laws, they don't have any rules about anything, they don't enforce rules because they don't need to, because it's not a competition-based society, right? It's a hunter-gatherer society. It's a cooperative society. And if you go down there and snatch fruit out of someone's hand, they're going to get pissed. And they're going to go, hey, man, that's not cool. You're not supposed to do that. But they all recognize that, right? So you could say, well, there's probably a fundamental law there. Don't steal shit that's not yours. So, hey, we got 2 of them right now. Don't kill people. Don't steal shit. Likewise, if you went down and punched a Hazda in the mouth and just said, hey, I don't like the way you're talking to me, and socked him, chances of good tempers would flare, right? So you go, hey, probably shouldn't assault people, probably shouldn't. If you dragged one of the Hazda's women away and kidnapped her, people would probably get pretty pissed about that. So you can kind of trace out like natural rules that all cooperative human beings are going to follow, just like all competitive human beings are going to follow, right? Don't steal people, don't kidnap people, don't force people to do stuff against their will. These things are all kind of like lumped together as pretty universal rules. You start tracing outside those boundaries, though, and all of a sudden you get into a really weird, nebulous, never-ending black pit of God knows what the fuck you're coming up with. And you can criminalize everything, because countries around the world have criminalized things like thinking, and they've criminalized things like talking, and they've criminalized things like criticizing the king or criticizing the supreme leader, or any number of things. All crimes. So I go, the problem with crime is that it's just some bullshit thing that people came up with. And if we could trace back to like what you might call universal crimes, then that's probably getting us. But that's where the Constitution started. But that's where English law started. But it always develops into more complicated stuff because we're in competition with each other. We're not cooperating with each other, generally speaking, right? At least from our legal standpoint. So. But I think Bitcoin fixes that too. Like, I think it engenders a more cooperative society, and I think under a cooperative society, you don't need as many rules. So I think a lot of this criminality stuff goes away. And we can all collectively as a society say, hey, we don't think it's a good idea for adult men to have sex with teenage girls. That's fine. Like, if everyone can kind of get on board with that and they can recognize, like, hey, there's harm from this, it's kind of like forcing someone to do something against their will. So you can sort of trace rules around that, right? But just to draw these little black letter rules, it's because of the nature of the society we've created. It's not about any fundamental rules from God or nature or humankind, right? So we just have to be careful with the rules we create, I guess.
Yeah, I know. And it's hugely philosophical. I supervise all of the sex offenders who have to be on supervision in a couple of counties. And the stories and justifications I'll hear about behavior, they can run a wide gamut, some of which I relate to, and I understand we're translating law towards trying to end harm. And then others are straight up sick. And it's like saying, well, this wasn't a crime back in the Stone Age. You could do this. Why do we just make up these laws?
Right.
Like, you don't rape people.
That's what you did, hurt people, dickhead. That's why,
You don't rape, or you're not in a position of power from which you can groom and coerce and maintain a situation that is not by choice for the other person.
Right.
And so, reasonable explanations and stories around sick behavior. And where am I going with this? When you're trying to make and enforce laws, it gets sticky because if only it was so simple as to say, oh, see, if you squint up in the air, you can see God. And if you listen so clearly, you can hear him. And he's just telling us what to do, thank God.
Right, yeah.
But no, we're trying to do what is more conducive to good and what is less conducive for bad. And there's other stuff and there's other stuff where it's like, well, in this case, it's okay. In this case, it's not okay. But this, and depends. And oh wait, totality of circumstances, and it's complicated,
Right.
and you want to have your fixed rules. What was the word you certitude? You want to have certitude about the world.
Right. Yeah.
So we're applying certitude like, well, that's bad.
Right.
Treating other people without fundamental human rights, bad. Okay,
Right.
we're good there. Fundamental human rights. Okay. So no one can ever say anything that's an opinion or not anything about anything disparaging or biased or anti-person or hate or anything.
Right.
Fundamental human rights, right? Do not think or say anything that's anti-something.
Right.
Because that's one translation of the law.
Yeah.
And that's where we're at now, is that we're trying to translate well-intended, perhaps, laws of human order to control freakism at every level.
Right. Well, that's where rules always go, right? I mean, that's the problem with rules, is like every rule begets a new rule, because you have to have a rule for the thing that the last rule didn't cover, right? And so you end up in these really convoluted, complex, hundreds of thousands of pages of statutory law, case law, administrative law, all that kind of shit. It just piles and piles and piles, so much so that it just becomes a source of chaos, right? And I mean, if you take it out of the realm of like person-on-person crimes, like a sex crime is a person-on-person crime, right? But if you talk about like drug use, right? Libertarians go, well, they're not harming anybody except themselves, so they should be allowed to do it. But there's a different subset of libertarians that go, oh, yeah, that's not true. They're creating a societal harm. So they are harming other people, because we have to go scrape them off the ground. We have to go devote resources to protect other people from them when they're wasted. We have to, so there is a harm outside of them, and then they will sit there and battle about that for fucking forever, right? That's just using drugs. That's just using alcohol, and you can make a case either way. That's a libertarian argument on both sides. And go, well, I'm not harming it. So yeah, if you lock yourself in your bedroom and you just sit there and you just get wasted and then you just fucking drop dead from it, then yeah, I guess technically you didn't harm anybody but yourself. But then you can trace out and go, well, there's emotional harm there. There's a harm to society. Like if you didn't just die and you have to get more health care, that's a harm to society, because you're taking healthcare resources from somebody else. And never mind if you go out and you're drunk and you beat somebody up, then you go, now you've got all kinds of extra harm on top of that might not have happened had you not been drinking. So there's a very libertarian reason why we should ban drinking. And you're like, well, but then you're impinging on someone's freedom to choose what they do with their body and what they ingest and all that kind of stuff.
Yep.
So how do you trace it out? I mean, it becomes just this enormously complex exercise, right? But again, if you go to like the Hazda tribe, or you go to any hunter-gatherer tribe, like a pure hunter-gatherer tribe, they don't struggle with this. They don't have those philosophical debates because they don't have to, because their society just isn't fundamentally predicated on those kind of ideas, right? So it's a sticky wicket, as they say. But
and it could very much, because when you have a small tribe, you can sort it out. When you have a tribe that involves 1 billion people, it's just not the same. It's got to be draconian. I don't know.
Well, the only way you can have a tribe of 1 billion people is if you have agriculture. And if you have agriculture, you have centralized resources. And the second you have centralized resources, you have people competing for control of those resources. And the second you have people competing for control over the resources, then you have to have complex rule sets to make sure that works. And once you have complex rule sets, then you end up with, all the trickle-down problems of rule sets, right? And the chaos that emerges from complex rule sets. And once you get into the chaos of complex rule sets, then all of a sudden you have people that can gain power by exploiting that chaos to their advantage. And once you have people exploiting the chaos to their advantage and coming up with even more complex rule sets to, try and undo the injustices of the previous complex rule set, then you end up with today, where you've got people that can leverage all kinds of chaos and stupidity to further political agendas, to enrich themselves, to exploit resources, to exploit people, to exploit governments, to exploit money. So one of the things you fundamentally have to do if you want to exist in a competitive resource capture-based economy is you have to at least fix one rule that is inviolable, and one rule that you can't break, and one rule that everybody has to follow. And guess what? The only thing that human beings have ever invented in the history of humankind that can do that is Bitcoin, is the sort of broad point of the Great Realignment. Is like, fix that one rule and you change a lot of fucking rules that flow out from it. If you don't have a mechanism to exploit, then it makes it a lot harder, and you don't need to write as many rules to get around the exploitation and then to try and curtail the exploitation, because there's one thing you just can't fundamentally fuck with. And so if you have fundamental property rights embodied in hash power rather than sovereignty, then that changes everything. That changes every calculus that comes after it. And the exponential trickle out effect from that is just enormous, right? I mean, it's such a titanic shift in the way competitive resource capture based societies operate. It's really, really, really hard to capture, in my mind, just how deep that rabbit hole goes, right? It's so profound that it sort of boggles my mind. And I start getting into realms of like, oh, this is where that Star Trek world comes from, where we went from like that one episode where they're walking around in the late 2000s and going, yeah, there's all these fucking homeless camps everywhere and they're officially state run, to 100 years later they were sitting there going like, yeah, we solved hunger, we solved want, we solved need, everyone is taken care of, everyone can explore their best whatever version of themselves, and now we're traveling among the stars and fighting Klingons for fucking control of the universe, right?
Yeah.
But that can happen if you have a fundamental shift in that one rule. If you can fix that rule, that's the future I kind of see. Not Star Trek, but something that looks like that, where people are thriving and getting along and cooperating for the most part. And you know, I think people just don't give enough weight to what this means in a competition-based resource capturing economy, right? It's like if you just went to EVE Online and you said, hey, nobody can steal resources. Like, you can't control resources in EVE Online. Just ask Travis, who is a big EVE Online guy, just say, hey, what would happen to the game if you made it so no one could steal resources from each other? You go, oh, it would be a completely different game.
Yeah.
Exactly. You could let all the same rules go. You could have all the same exact, there's no rules in nullsec. You can just fucking fly around and beat the shit out of each other, do whatever you want. But the one thing you can't do is capture the most critical resource. You can't control it. Nobody can control it. Nobody can. The only way you can get it is through trade, period. There's no other way to get it. You go, what happens the rest of the game? Completely different game. Just one fucking fixed rule, completely different game.
Yeah.
Right? So, you know, and that's what I'm saying. You know, when I wrote the Great Realignment, that's what I'm going, that's what realigns it. It's not that everyone's going to suddenly just, you know, find God and become altruistic fucking carnivores that like to exercise and bask in the sun. Like, those things may happen on an individual level, right? But fundamentally, it fixes a really core problem in a resource capture game.
Yeah, it's a good parallel that I love thinking about, because I love the Star Trek universe, you know, the ideals of where humans could be in not a perfect universe, but quite a good one from a human perspective, in the sense Bitcoin is the hyperdrive, and Satoshi Nakamoto is a Zephram Cochrane who invented in Montana, and he took off. Now, not that we have Vulcans, they're going to notice that and say, "Oh shit! Hey, they just woke up. Hey, let's."
Well, don't say that, because we got a super intelligence coming along right now that's created, and that could very well be our Vulcans that kind of come down and go, "Oh, hey, you guys actually figured out how to fix something. Cool. All right, we're going to run with that." I mean, the thing is if AI has to play by that same rule, and it's way smarter than we are, and it doesn't have the same morality problems and bias problems and all that kind of shit, then I think if they go, hey, this is a good rule, we're going to abide by this rule, and then we're going to guide people towards the right outcome, right? We're not going to let them blow themselves up anymore. We have a fixed rule. We have the only way people can interact with each other financially is through trade, period. Because the ultimate resource to capture right now is only tradable. It's not seizable. Huge fucking difference in the history of mankind. Because you can go steal someone's gold. All I got to do is get a bigger army than you, and I'll fucking bonk you on the head. I'll take it. You can seize someone's land. You can seize someone's life. You can seize all kinds of shit, but you can't take their fucking property anymore. It's an enormous deal. I mean, it changes everything on such a profound level. I wish I could, interface better with God so I could convey what that means to humanity, because it's so huge. But
well, I love thinking about just this human turning of the corner. We hit hyperdrive, and the universe says, hello, humans are here, and we're brought in to the fold, which is such a better place. And in the meantime, we weren't even worth paying attention to, but we just struggled and dug our trenches on a little dirt pile. And then we find this Bitcoin. We achieve hyperdrive. The universe takes notice. And 100 years later, people are like, oh, yeah, the 21st century, I mean, who knows, but it's like Stone Age, you know.
Yeah.
They didn't get it.
Well, I think, you know the fourth turning, right? Like that book, The Fourth Turning.
Yeah.
I genuinely believe Bitcoin is the fifth turning. I think this is the last turn we make. I swear to God. And people can call me a Pollyanna or whatever they want. I legitimately believe, those turnings make sense. Throughout history, they've made sense. And now there's a different fucking age coming upon us. It's the fifth turning. It's the fifth and the last turning. Everything from here on out just gets better.
It breaks all.
100%. It breaks all models. It breaks all fucking everything. So that's why, again, tracing back to the earlier part, I get super fucking anxious about people that sort of take mining for granted. I go, we're not there yet. We just need a little bit more room. And if we can just get across that, then the world becomes a beautiful place. Humans get to reach their potential. And I think that's such a magical possibility. Just the thought of people working cooperatively, trading fairly, and then competing for, improvements in humanity rather than competing for fucking gobbling up fiat nonsense. It's an enormous shift. Even people competing for fiat nonsense have taken us to a place that's pretty fucking amazing right now. Keep that same incentive structure to further humanity, get rid of the incentive structure that is resource capture and changes it into resource trade. It's a different game, right? I do need to flesh out chapter 4 a little bit more.
Yeah, I hadn't thought about that. That's awesome. Well, I'm going to read your final chapter, and then I'm going to percolate on it. And if I can conjure up more amazing, what does all this mean, I'll let you know. But
well, thank you. I might actually transcribe what I just said right now and try and wiggle that in the book too. I think this is a pretty good example. Maybe this is the way I can sum up my book, make it, make it that poignant finish.
The fifth turning.
Yeah,
that's a whole nother part.
Right. Yeah.
I don't know. No, Bitcoin is the fifth turning. So, well, awesome.
That should be the name of this episode, The Fifth Turning.
The fifth turning. That's really what it is.
Yeah. That's where we're at, man. I'm excited.
With Star Trek, there's no Bitcoin, but there's just sort of we don't know what happened between hyperdrive and Vulcans, and then I guess there were just resources available. But I think maybe step one was that the Vulcans gave us effectively free energy and probably some galactic policy on how to have law. And that just sort of cured us.
I think we've already created it. No one has recognized the power of the rule we just created, right? As soon as they do, people are already realizing it. Bitcoin holders already know this rule. They go, hey, this is a way better way to fucking do things. Fundamentally, I can just tell because I'm doing it and it works, right? Yeah. More and more people will inevitably, they have to see it because it's a superior rule. Just like if you were playing an EVE Online and you just showed up to the game and you're way behind all the fucking big coalitions that are controlling all the resources, and then you find out, hey, there's a new valuable resource here that the only way I can get it is to either mine it or trade someone for it. There's no other way to get it. No one can come and capture the mine and just steal all the Bitcoin for themselves. The only way I can do it is I can go set up a mine and I get some early on, or I go trade someone else for it. Period. That's end of story. That game, if you just introduce that rule right now to EVE Online, it fundamentally changes that game.
Right.
And that game would suddenly, all those people that are out resource capturing and stuff like that, they're gonna very rapidly start reorienting towards, how do I get better at trading with people? How do I get better at mining? How do I get better at this? How do I get better at this? Oh, if I create some value, more people will want to trade Bitcoin with me, rather than, if I just get a bigger army, I can go fuck with people and get more, whatever resources popular in EVE Online. Do you see what I'm saying?
pirate. Like it, I'm not going to get rich, but I can go around and just squish little nice people.
Yeah. I mean, and that's the incentive in EVE Online right now. You gang up and you beat the shit out of somebody and you steal their stuff.
Yep.
And then they have to get in a big race. And then the trade ends up being like, here's some upgrades to your shit so you can't get beat up as easily. And then here's some upgrades to your shit so you can beat people better. And then these guys got to group up, and it's a fucking mirror image of the society we've created because it's based on the same fundamental principles. Go get shit from people, and that's how you get rich and powerful.
Yeah.
And then if you're really good at grouping up together, then you get really powerful. So if you strip away that incentive, you change everything, and you make that game. You could inject that fucking rule into that game right now to change that game forever. We already injected that rule into our game that we're all collectively playing in the meat space. It's already changed the game forever. The game is never going to get played the same again. It's just no one has caught on to the rule set yet.
Yeah.
A little tiny fraction of the population's got it right now. But that population is vocal, and they're out there, and they're spreading the word. And that's basically where I ended my book. I said, hey, man, we need to be very thoughtful about how we manage this network, and we have to have patience with the people who don't get it yet. But our job is to teach them, hey, there's a new rule in the world. You can't steal from people anymore. Get it? That's why Bitcoin's a big deal. You can't steal property anymore. That nobody can steal your property anymore. So
Right.
enjoy the beautiful world you get to create under a fundamental property right. Like as close as you can get to a God-granted fucking right. No one can infringe on it. It's huge. Anyway, I probably beat this fucking horse to death. So
No, it's the modern, perhaps less tangible paradigm shift that Star Trek has told us for a long time, which was apparently somehow free energy and transportation. Beam me up, and Bitcoin does that for money, and I think it'll become more and more apparent that people are, out of sheer habit or criminality, power structures, they're going to hold on and keep clawing away at the fiat thing, and more people are just going to see that as a losing game and just overtly criminal. Like, what are you doing? You're still doing that? Come on,
Well, they wouldn't. No one would ever do that again. Like all those people that are still fighting over resources in EVE Online, when the only resource of value can't be fought over, there would be zero incentive to keep doing that.
Yeah.
Right. Like, why would you go, hey, I still want to steal all that old shit that's not worth anything?
Yeah.
Why? Why would you do that? Oh, yeah, that's a good point. Why would I do that?
Yeah.
I should take what resources I have right now and try and maximize the way I can trade with other people.
Yeah.
And then suddenly the most powerful players in the world are playing a different game. And you just go, great. Where does humanity go from there? When they start building different tools and shit like that, not to fight each other, but to increase their tradability, you've suddenly created this highly incentivized cooperative society that's still competing with each other in a positive direction rather than towards the negative, right?
Yeah.
It's enormous. Yeah. Anyway.
Well, I am going
let's start a journey.
I'm going to give you some feedback on where I'm at, and it may take me a day or two, but
Oh yeah, take your time, man. I appreciate you just sitting down and giving it a read, but since I think you've read most of those chapters at a point when they were very incomplete, so if you want to devote yourself to reading an entire book, you're obviously welcome to, but all four parts of that book are very different than the stuff you read early on. So
I went and reread a couple of them. I think I'm going to go back and just to make sure I haven't missed anything, I'm going to skim and read through all of it and just make sure, like, okay, I remember all this and then what I missed.
Yeah.
So I'm going to read that, and then I will get back to you.
That's awesome, man. I appreciate that.
It's going to be exciting to have it, like, done.
Yeah, I can't wait.
Yeah.
Just be able to hold the paperback in my hands and just go, hey, that's my book. Then hand it out at Bitcoin shows.
Yeah.
You want the book?
Yeah, that's the thing. It don't matter what you wrote. It's like, I wrote a book. Oh, really? You wrote a book? A Bitcoin book? A Bitcoin book?
Yeah.
My God, Bitcoin just had $100,000 and nobody can stop talking about it lately.
I know.
That's important.
Yeah.
So, cool. All right, well, thanks for joining us remotely, and we made it work.
Yeah, mostly.
We're still doing it virtual, so. Cool. Thanks, man. We'll catch you next time.
All right, bye.
Cool. Bye.